Hello everyone and welcome back to the O Crit D&D Ravion campaign. Last we left off, the party had awoken after their struggle with the Hayes Syndicate in the hospital within the city of Fallfield, where in an effort to destroy any evidence of their being there, they had a faux fight and inadvertently, or maybe on purpose, burned the hospital down. Within the blaze, they found that the doctor that ran the hospital had apparently been working with or supporting Jared, the young man that they had tormented back in the city of Timber Falls. In this revelation, as Flawed had followed the woman back into the burning building and down into the basement as they made their escape, he lost his life to Jared. Jared stabbing him and cutting him to ribbons. Sad look on his face even still. Left Flawed to die there on the cold basement floor of this hospital's mortuary. The final thing, leaving off, was that the party had left the city of Fallfield on a mission from Darian Goldhand to transport a collection of these drugs from the city of Fallfield to Darian's researcher contract in the city of Moonshade. And that is where we'll be picking off. To start, we'll detail the contract that Flawed had signed with the Dark Deceiver in his younger days. So, I will just read the contract to you. This contract, formed between the scribe and the recipient, defines in detail the bonds, limitations, and extents of the pact herefore enacted at the moment of signed acknowledgement and active for an unending period of time. This contract is voided by the mutual agreement of the scribe and the recipient, as well as by the inability of the scribe to deliver on the terms of the contract. Upon agreement and signing of this contract, the recipient and scribe are bound to the parameters outlined in the contract below, and bound until the end period to their agreed obligations and parameters within the pact details. The recipient, defined as Flawed, the tiefling, hereafter is making this decision of his own free will, and has not been previously affected by the influence of the scribe. Hereafter described as a Dark Deceiver, Master of Contracts, Deal Maker within the heavens, and the lawfully recognized Master of Deals. Pact 1. The Dark Deceiver, Master of Contracts, Deal Maker within the heavens, and lawfully recognized Master of Deals, agrees to preserve the immortal soul of the recipient Flawed, the Tiefling, in perpetuity until the end of time. Pact 2. The Scribe, the Dark Deceiver, Master of Contracts, Deal Maker within the heavens, and lawfully recognized Master of Deals, agrees to preserve the life of Flawed, the Tiefling, extending his natural predetermined and outlined lifespan. Additionally, the Scribe, the Dark Deceiver, the Master of Contracts, Deal Maker within the heavens, and the lawfully recognized Master of Deals, agrees to protect the recipient Flawed, the Tiefling, from the wrath of the gods of death incurred by this enactment of the Second Pact, limiting their direct influence and ensuring that no defined being in existence can cause acute harm to Flawed, the Tiefling. In return, Flawed, the Tiefling, agrees to provide dealers to the recipient, the Dark Deceiver, Master of Contracts, Deal Maker within the heavens, and the lawfully recognized Master of Deals by invoking her name within the inner planes and driving mortals to seek deals with her. The pact is broken upon the natural death of the recipient Flawed, the Tiefling. Their mortal soul is to be delivered unto the Scribe, the Dark Deceiver, the Master of Contracts, Deal Maker within the heavens, and the lawfully recognized Master of Deals. In the ancient accords and unbreakable rule of law of the multiverse, the contract recognized and signed by the Scribe, the Dark Deceiver, Master of Contracts, Deal Maker within the heavens, and the lawfully recognized Master of Deals, and the recipient Flawed, the Tiefling, below. This is the contract that Flawed signed. In return for an already unnaturally long life and protection from the gods of death for this long life, as this perversion was likely to upset them, he had the opportunity to meet with this goddess and redefine some terms before enacting a return to life. The Dark Deceiver had offered him the power and purpose of driving people on the material plane to her as followers and deal makers. In return, he would return to life. He decided that he wanted to retain only a handful of his memories, with much of them being lost. He wanted her to scrub certain memories from his life, leaving only a handful intact. For this, she agreed that she could do this, but that it would cost him a very specific price. There would be more that she would require from him. She would require a more in-depth, dedicated service. As a counteroffer, he asked for more. He required a weapon by which to do that service. And in thinking for a moment, she came up with a weapon for him, holding before him a blade wrapped in what appeared to be rose vine. Different flowers blooming here and there, but with much of the blade forming a certain thorny stem. She offered this blade to him and offered him this life, and he sat there before her, thinking for just a moment. Looking up, he stared out into the void. It was dark, but not so threatening. Not like his dreams had been. And so, in one final decision, Flood determined to not return. He determined to allow death to take him, which the Dark Deceiver said, "That is fine. We will void this altered contract and return to the original," allowing him to pass on under her care, to remain with her in servitude under her dominion. So, the party, now in the living world, has been done burying Flood. Flood is dead. His story so far completed. Though, as I remind my players, just because Flood has died doesn't mean that his story doesn't continue. Different aspects of his backstory play in to the world, meaning that they can learn more about their deceased friend. So, now that they have done burying him, the party set out on the road, on foot, to make their way up to the city of Moonshade. Almost excited a little bit, Lemba was going to be passing by her hometown of Thala. It's a hidden elven village out in the deep wood, which is a large redwood forest. So, leading the party, she diverted them on to Thala, off in the deep wood. As they made their way through, down this roadway, they left behind the dry grassland and still somewhat dry forested area with these large red granite rocks, and slowly entered a more lush and cool forest. This forest then grew with much larger amounts and steps of different altitudes and massive redwood trees. They found different animals along the way, spotting a The mountain lion that had briefly stood off against them at the top of a ridge before collecting her babies and moving on. And then finally, a giant moss tortoise. A creature the size of, at least in our world, probably the size of a VW bus. And relatively covered in this lichen and moss that grew on its shell as it munched on ferns and enjoyed the sap of redwood trees as it kind of meandered its way through the forest. Continuing on, the party did run into an odd fellow off to the side of the road, just a short distance, who was standing with his notebook trying to organize a series of rocks into a ring, standing in the center of it. This man was a brightly orange and yellow colored elf, actually an Eladrin, an autumn Eladrin by the name of Lothric Feanwyn. The rocks that he was surrounded by, very similarly to the rocks within the rest of the Grassbend region, were not too keen on staying in place. And they skittered off every now and then out of position, with him trying to put them back in the correct order for his research goals. Distracted by the party's arrival, the rest of the rocks scattered off, and Sudi, running over, stomped on one, hearing a slight crunch, before picking it up to see the rock had little legs and claws and appeared to be almost crab-like. Limp in her grasp with a small trickle of this bluish blood, she seems to have finally killed a rock. Now, meeting up with Lothric, the party introduced themselves, and in their discussion, they determined that Lothric would follow them, join them on their journey to Thala, and onwards. Slowly, kind of telling them about themselves over the course of the journey, the party learned more about this Eladrin man. He was a part of the Feanwyn household, a group of hunters from the Feywild that had moved out from the Feywild onto the material plane in the hope of expansion. And he was there with a few of his siblings to develop a hunting guild that specializes in the hunting and killing of dangerous creatures within the world. He, being the researcher and kind of alchemist of this group, has been sent out to find another group of hunters that had established contact with them and secure this meeting, discover more about this already established group of material plane hunters, and see what they could do for the Feanwyn household. The Sanguine Nightingales, as the guild was called. Continuing on their travels, they found themselves oddly watched by hidden elves in the forest before a massive dire bear sprinted out of the brush and stopped just before them, roaring into Lemba's face as the group drew their weapons. Lemba, unamused, recognized her cousin as the young man changed back from his bear form, laughing and excited to see her, though disappointed, not sure why she had left. In the years prior, Lemba had lived in the village of Thala under her adoptive elven father and with her uncle and cousin, who now stood before her. In those years past, she left with a no voice, no warning, abandoning the rest of the group after her father died, feeling unwelcome. Now, her cousin, not sure why she had disappeared, was still excited to see her, though curious as to where she had been. Leading them into Thala, He spoke with them as they made their way to the village elders for more information on Lemba's backstory and Lothric's interest in this group of other hunters that the people of Thala had interacted with. The people of Thala typically do not associate with outsiders, instead guarding the tear to the plane of fire that does exist deep within the center of their clearing of redwood trees. Entering into the village, as many elven villages are, the various structures seem to be built almost as if they grew from the trees themselves, though they aren't on the ground. Using various elevators and platforms that would raise them to the highest tips of the trees, they found themselves in this walkway village with different branches and bridges leading them back and forth across its interconnected circle. High above the trees, then, the party was able to look down and see the very few bit of natural world elements at the center of the clearing that are otherwise undisturbed, leading you to wonder, if you were on the ground, if there even was a village there. The party then, as they spoke, discussed why they would even interact with the hunters, with her cousin, Lemba's cousin, discussing how the hunters were actually beneficial and for the most part left them alone and kept their secret of their location, bringing them supplies and information only about every decade or so. Now, as they entered the elder's hut, or the elder's longhouse would be a better description, the party sat before this council, with the lead elder being an old and cold woman. Elven in appearance, she, under further investigation, seemed to actually be a winter Eladrin. Chilly and gruff, she was rude to the party, and unhappy to see Lemba had returned, as the rest of the village didn't exactly see eye to eye with the young woman. They laughed at the party's request for more information on the cave that Lemba had been found in. Before she had been adopted by her father, Lemba was found within a cave near the city of Thala, off in the Deepwood. A cave whose location was secreted away to only the few that had originally found it and the leaders of the Elders' Council. Being a dangerous place, especially after the death of Lemba's father, or at least disappearance of her father, it had been marked as off-limits. No one could go there for the threat that it posed to the people of the village. Seeking to convince them, the party spent maybe an hour or so arguing back and forth with the leadership in an attempt to convince them to deliver the location, as Lemba's cousin and had lost his father, her uncle, as he had gone off to find the cave where his brother had died only a week or so before. Now, after finally convincing them with one of these blue teardrop-shaped gemstones, the party was excited to be able to get on their way, though it was late in the day. Seeing as there was already a home for Lemba within the village, her old childhood home, her father's home, they went there, spending the evening there and talking with her and her cousin as they took some time to make some baked goods and enjoy themselves before preparing to set off onto the road the following day for the cave off in the woods. Hearing, before they left, of this old woman Eldri, the Winter Eladrin leadership, that had investigated one of these blue teardrop gemstones. She had slipped into a coma after being in contact with this gemstone. From here, the party, with this all fresh in their minds, decided to rush out and leave the town, making their way off towards this cave that they hoped to find more information on Lemba and find her uncle before returning to their journey to Moonshade. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the Okrit D&D Ravion campaign. We'll end up kind of covering a little bit more for what happens with Lumba's backstory and a few other things in the next episode, Session 10. Thank you all once again for tuning in, and remember, it doesn't take much to make a difference out there, so be the difference that you want to see in the world. Thank you all again, and I will see you all next time. Bye.